Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi ta'ala wabarakatuh. A very good morning and salam sejahtera to our honorable participant, ladies and gentlemen. I am Dr. Amar, Head of Energy and Social Sustainability at IEPRe. I trust all of you are keeping well and staying safe wherever you are. To all Muslim participants, I wish you happy Ramadan. It is a great honor for us to have you all here today. Welcome to the fourth series of Energy Live webinar organized by the Institute of Energy Policy and Research, IEPRe. I believe most of you are familiar with IEPRe, but please allow me to introduce IEPRe once again. IEPRe was officially launched on 11 August 2009 as part of UNITEN Strategic Transformation Initiative to spearhead research and consultancy activity. IEPRe has received strong support from Tenaga Nasional Berhad, Energy Commission Malaysia, as well as the Ministry. The establishment of IEPRe is very timely as Malaysia needs to focus on the energy and environment and assist the government, cooperation and other stakeholders to make informed decisions. Today's webinar, how COVID-19 changes the dynamic of gas market and what is the implication to Malaysia, is a continuation of the previous three series of webinar organized by IEPRe. For those who missed our earlier webinar, you can access them via our website. Ladies and gentlemen, in this fourth webinar, Prof. Dr. Ken Koyama will highlight the importance of natural gas LNG in the world's energy mix in light of the rapidly changing global energy landscape, the uncertainty concerning the world natural gas LNG supply demand balance due to the COVID-19 pandemic, and the future of natural gas LNG market. This webinar is being recorded and is scheduled to take 1 hour, including 30 minutes allocated to Q&A session. If you have any question, please type your question on the Q&A feature. At the end of this webinar, you are required to fill in the feedback to receive the e-certificates. Before we begin, let me introduce our speaker. Prof. Dr. Ken Koyama is currently the Chair in Energy Economics of Energy Commission Malaysia and is the Senior Managing Director of Strategic Research Unit and Chief Economist at the Institute of Energy Economics Japan, IEEJ. Ladies and gentlemen, it is now my pleasure to invite Prof. Dr. Ken Koyama to present his talk. Please welcome Prof. Ken.
Dr. Amal, thank you very much indeed for your kind introduction. Good morning to everybody. I'm Ken Koyama. As introduced, I am the Chair in Energy Economics of Energy Commission at UNITEN and also the Senior Managing Director and Chief Economist at IEJ. Today, this morning, I'm very happy to share my views on the subject matter of how COVID-19 changed the dynamics of gas market and what is the implication to Malaysia. I do believe this is extremely timely and a very important topic for every energy stakeholder in Malaysia. So let me share my slide. So I hope that you can see my slide without any problem, but if there is any problem, please let me know. In my presentation today, I will focus on three major subjects or topics. The first three I will touch upon the historical development of natural gas and LNG market. And today, with special focus given to the importance of Asian market and importance of LNG market. And the second subject I'd like to highlight is the impact of COVID-19 on gas market and LNG market. Again, the special focus will given to the issue related to the impact on demand and supply, and in particular price volatilities. And this price volatility was accelerated by the special factors such as very recent power shortage or power crisis in Japan and in Texas, United States, early this year. And third topic or subject is the long-term problem or long-term issues surrounding the world and Asian gas and LNG market, and with including the issue related to the implication to Malaysia. So let me start by showing this slide. And this slide is a very simple illustration on how the various sources of energy in the world continue to see the growth in the past half century since the 1965 up to now. The red line shows that the oil demand, black line shows the coal demand, blue line shows the gas demand, and thin blue line shows that hydropower, and yellow for nuclear power, and green for renewable energy. The purpose of this illustration is how big that the growth of respective energy source in the past half century. But for this presentation, I would like to especially emphasize the growth in natural gas is remarkable in two ways. One, the absolute level of growth is very, very large. Of course, oil demand, coal demand, and renewable green line shows the growth. But you can see the blue line that the natural gas demand shows a very, very large demand growth in the past 5 decades. And the second important issue is the growth of natural gas is extremely steady and stable. This compares the relatively unstable growth in case of oil demand, shown in the red line, in case of coal demand, in the black line. There are some up and down on the gas or oil demand and global coal demand, but you can see that the natural gas showed a very, very steady, stable, and strong growth in the past. So in this sense, natural gas is really a kind of preferred energy option in the world. This slide also illustrates the global natural gas demand, but by region in the past half century. And you can see in the early days, 1960s, 70s, global natural gas demand really concentrated or dominated by 3 regions. 1, North America, 2, Europe, and 3, CIS, or former Soviet Union. Actually, almost all of natural gas demand are concentrated in these 3 regions. Natural gas is supplied within these regions by domestic pipelines. And even as of now, North America, Europe, and CIS continue to be a very, very important natural gas market in the world. The three regions altogether accounted for almost 6% of global gas demand. But in the past 5 decades, there are new development. We are seeing the very strong growth in the Middle East, and also in particular, the red part, Asia Pacific is becoming the major gas demand center. As I mentioned, North America, Europe, CIS continue to be important, but now the global gas market became more diversified, while the share of Asian gas demand showed a remarkable growth. Asia is becoming a very important natural gas market. In terms of international trade of gas, this chart simply illustrates the historical development of pipeline trade versus LNG trade. In the late 1990s, pipeline trade, shown in the pink bar, dominated the global gas trade. Almost more than 70% of global trade was accounted for by pipeline trade, while LNG trade, of course important, but accounted for a minor portion of the global trade. In the last 20 years, 30 years, we are seeing the steady growth of international trade of gas. And even the latest record, 2090, shows that the dominant part of the gas trade is pipeline trade. But as you can see very clearly, the growth of LNG trade is much, much larger than the trade in pipeline. Why? Simply because the improvement of economics of LNG export and import trade, thanks to the utilization of economy of scale, technology R&D, and serious effort made by industries related LNG industries. In other words, LNG became more competitive than pipeline trade in the past 2-3 decades. And now many experts, including myself, strongly believe this trend will continue and LNG will become a more increasingly important form of gas international trade. In the 2030-2040, the share of LNG may become 6%, 70%, far outpacing the growth of pipeline trade. LNG is going to become a very important story of international gas trade. And within the LNG trade, this chart illustrates the breakdown of LNG import by region. Again, in early days, LNG is a very preferred energy trade by OECD Asia, in particular by Japan. And actually, Japan started LNG import for more than 50 years ago to combat the air pollution. And Japan continued to be the #1 LNG importer in the world. As you can see, the dark blue bar for OECD Asian LNG demand continued to be very important even in the year 2019. But again, you can see that more diversified structure is emerging in terms of LNG import. You can see the very strong growth in China, India, and other Asian countries, including ASEAN member, such as yourself in Malaysia. And of course, thin blue bar, Europe continued to be very important LNG importers. But as you can see that Asia, in particular emerging and developing Asia, is going to be a very important LNG market in the world and in Asia. The structural shift is ongoing, and we again do believe that this tendency will continue. Then we need to ask why this strong growth for gas and LNG, in particular in Asia, and what factor will affect the future demand growth. Firstly, as everyone can easily understand, economic growth matters a lot. When economy expands, energy demand can easily expand, and as a preferred energy source, natural gas demand or LNG demand will increase. And second, very important topic is the need to protect environment in two ways. One is to combat air pollution. In particular, this is true for Asia. As I mentioned earlier, even in Japan, 50 years ago, why we decided to start importation of LNG is to combat with the urban air pollution. But now, another very important need to protect environment, namely climate change issues. I'll come back on later. This is going to be increasingly important issue for everybody, every country, every energies, thanks to the new wave of carbon neutrality in the world. I'll touch upon later. And also price matters. When gas price or LNG price can be low enough, affordable enough, the demand growth is accelerated. But on the other hand, when the gas price, LNG price is high, the growth will be negatively affected. And also we need to consider the competition with or against other energy sources in Asia, in particular against coal, nuclear power, and renewable energy, and other oil refined product, including LPG. And also, the different story comes from the impact of power and gas market reform. In the end, if we talk about the gas and LNG demand, it is actually the fact that the pipeline gas and LNG supply can compete each other. So these very complicated factors continue to affect the demand growth or the speed of the growth or the extent of the demand growth in Asia in particular. And this is very, very important if we look at the energy portfolio situation in Asia. This simple chart illustrates the difference in the global total energy mix by region, Asia, European Union, United States, and world average. And Asia is uniquely dependent on coal for almost 50% for our primary energy supply. And the share of natural gas in the year 2019 stood at just 12%, which is almost half or less than half of other important regions such as EU or United States, and even the very, very low as compared to the world average. This is the truth. This is the reality in Asia. But this reality means if we make a sufficient approach, sufficient strategy, sufficient policy, there's a big room that we can see the growth in natural gas in Asia, in particular replacing the currently dominating energy source, which is coal. The switching away from coal to other sources, including natural gas, continue to be a very, very important topic for the energy mix development in the future. But we need to be careful about the country difference. The previous chart talked about Asia as a whole, but this chart indicates the country by country difference for energy portfolio position in many Asian countries: China, India, Japan, Korea, Indonesia, Thailand, Taiwan, Malaysia, Singapore. This is the order of the size of primary energy consumption in Asian countries. And you can easily find out that the China and India, two giants of energy consumption in Asia, heavily dependent on coal consumption. The coal dominance is particularly true for these two giants. But of course, other Asian countries, Japan, Korea, Indonesia, Thailand, Taiwan, Malaysia, also depend on coal and oil. So I think that there's still that big chance in terms of seeing the growth of natural gas share in total energy consumption for the future. But at the same time, we can easily see that some of the member Asian countries, such as Thailand or yourself, Malaysia, already see relatively high natural gas share in total primary energy consumption. But for these two countries, I am very much interested in what is going to happen in terms of the change in supply of natural gas. So far, domestic natural gas production played an important role for these two countries. But growingly, the import of natural gas will become a very important chunk of supply source in the future. That's why we need to be very careful what is going to happen in gas market and LNG market globally and in Asia and Asia by country. For this purpose, I would like to touch upon that ongoing or current emerging global energy problem or landscape. Firstly and foremost, we need to be very cautious about the impact of COVID-19 pandemic. Still, we are suffering. Many countries in the world, although the progress of vaccination, many people are still suffering this very serious pandemic. And because of the pandemic, the 2020 global energy market was characterized by the very severe oversupply and low energy prices. And the last year, 2020, we also had a US election, presidential election, and since January this year, we have a new administration headed by President Biden. Many people in the world are closely watching what is the meaning of the new administration in the United States, what is the impact on foreign policy, security policy, economic policy, and climate policy and energy policy. The United States is a seriously important country in terms of the international impact on various aspects. But at the same time, Asia, it is a fact that Asia is a gravity center of the energy demand growth. And between Asia and the United States, in particular, between the United States and China, there is a very serious geopolitical tension is now emerging. Some people call that US-China new Cold War. In the past, we had a real Cold War between United States and Soviet Union. Probably that a new Cold War situation can be quite different, but in character, but the impact on the new Cold War is really grave. At the same time, in terms of the protection of the globe or protection of the world environment, we are seeing the very strong and unique waves of carbon neutral target. So under the circumstance, we need to pay a very strong attention to the advanced or innovative technology, such as hydrogen, carbon capture, utilization and storage, direct air capture of CO2, whatever. So we need to depend on innovation if we really solve the problem of carbon neutral or whatever. And finally, I would like to draw your attention that the recent power market crisis in Japan and Texas early this year attract a new attention on the importance of the energy security, in particular electricity security of supply, which is very important for any countries. Firstly, I would like to take some time to talk about the impact of the pandemic. Probably the most important issue is whether we can see the peak out or the stabilization of the pandemic or not. As I mentioned, many countries in the world, United States, Israel, UK, saw the very steady, strong progress of vaccination to the respective citizens in the countries. At the same time, the pace of the newly infected people are not stopped. We are seeing the third wave or fourth wave of the pandemic in many countries in the world, including many European countries, Japan, India, and many other developing world. So we should be still very, very careful at what timing we are seeing the real peak out of the pandemic. So under the circumstance, the global economy is now in the process of recovery. The latest IMF, International Monetary Fund, projection, we call it the World Economic Outlook, released early this month, indicated that the last year, 2020, the global economy declined 3.5%, the largest decline since the Great Depression in the year 1920s, 20s and 30s. And because of the strong decline in the last year, we are expecting that a rather strong economic recovery for this year. The IMF forecast at 6.0% global GDP growth for this year. But we need to ask the question, is it really possible that we can expect this kind of V-shaped recovery for this year and beyond? Probably much depend on the pace of the third wave or fourth wave or the peak out timing of the pandemic. So under the circumstance, we will continue to have the negative impact of the pandemic, both in terms of energy supply and energy demand. And also, the difficulty created by the pandemic includes the lower price of energy. That the lower price of energy may have the positive impact on economy or the demand side, but it is extremely difficult for the investment side and energy industry and energy producing countries, including yourself. And also, as you may remember in my past energy webinar, I touched upon many problems caused by the pandemic as a kind of structural changes or structural problems. This chart again illustrates the impact of the city lockdown on energy demand. When the pandemic started, many countries are forced to take very strong measures of restriction of movement, restriction of people's life. We call it city lockdown. And when the city lockdown is conducted, the energy demand is critically reduced, in particular for oil demand, because city lockdown, by definition, regulates the transportation. That's why oil demand is projected to be reduced by almost 20% by the effect of city lockdown. But you can see that gas demand as well is restricted by city lockdown. In IEPRe calculation, the global gas demand during the city lockdown period is reduced by 11%, which is big, enormous. But as I mentioned earlier, oil demand is really heavily affected by the pandemic so far, and probably continue to be so. The global oil demand in 2019 was 99.7 million barrels per day. But you can see from the right-hand side picture, left-hand side picture, the 2020 global oil demand was 91 million barrels per day, almost a 10% decline. This is unprecedented oil demand decline in its history because of the city lockdown, because of the restriction of international aviation, and because of the reduction of global economic activity altogether pointed at a very severe reduction in oil demand. That's why many oil companies in the world are seriously affected at the lower demand and lower energy oil prices. But you can see that this year, 2021, oil demand projected to bounce back to 95.9 million barrels per day. And if everything goes normal, next year, 2022, the global oil demand will recover the level of the demand in the year 2019. So for the 2-3 years time, the global oil demand will recover the pre-pandemic level. But at the same time, you can see actually that 2-3 years is a long time. So that impact of the pandemic was so serious. And under this very negatively affected oil demand caused the extreme oil price volatility as shown in this chart. You can find that the negative price, you may remember that April last year, about just 1 year ago, the futures oil trading in NYMEX recorded that the -37 oil prices. -37 means the seller of the future contract in NYMEX could not find any buyers. And the supplier of the futures contract need to desperately find the buyer, and so that they need to pay extra prices to find the buyers. So that's the reason of this extreme event of negative prices. This was caused by the kind of unique characteristics of future trading, but the bottom line is extreme oversupply caused by the pandemic of extremely low oil demand. But this extreme low prices caused several responses, in particular in supply side. As you may remember that OPEC Plus countries, led by Saudi Arabia and Russia, decided to the historic supply coordinated reduction since May last year. They decided to reduce the coordinated supply of 10 million barrels per day, which is unprecedented. And this reduction, together with the reduction in shale supply, oil supply, caused by the poor economics, resulted in the rebalancing of the oil market. That's why oil price started to recover to the $40 per barrel level since May, June last year, and gradually going up since November last year. Now we are seeing at around $60 for both WTI and Brent. So now that the $60 seems to be the kind of new normal after the impact of COVID-19 pandemic. We don't know which way that oil price go from now on, but clearly the big impact of the COVID-19 created this difficult situation for oil market. What about the natural gas market? Again, this left-hand side graph indicates the global natural gas demand trend since 2017 to the projection up to 2022. And this projection is just published by myself, my colleague in IEJ last month. As mentioned earlier, global natural gas demand was characterized by the long-term, very strong, and very steady continued growth in the past half century. But you can see the global natural gas demand in the year 2020 see the very strong substantial decline. Again, it is very, very unprecedented. The global natural gas demand declined more than 2%. In other words, the long-term growth trend was stopped because of the negative impact of the COVID-19. But again, because of the growth in global GDP for this year and beyond, natural gas demand in the year 2021 and 2022 is projected to bounce back very, very strongly. With the exception of the 2020s, natural gas demand may be able to say, we may be able to say that the global natural gas demand will going back to the growth trend in the past, with the exception of the year 2020. If everything goes back to normal, and if everything goes back to normal at the condition of continued global GDP growth, as projected by IMF, we will see the return to the normal situation in terms of the global natural gas demand. But again, last year's impact was so severe. What is about the story of global LNG demand up to the year 2020? You can also see that the impact of the COVID-19 in the year 2020. Until 2019, global LNG demand continued to see the very strong demand growth. Every year you can see the jump in demand up to 2019. But in the year 2020, there's no jump. But interestingly, the global LNG demand in the year 2020 was a small growth from the previous year. This is a contrast to the global natural gas demand. Natural gas demand in the world actually contracted in the year 2020, while global LNG demand not contracted, showed that some small growth. Why this happened? This is a very, very interesting question. The short answer is that LNG market is characterized by more supply-driven nature. What that means? LNG supply project which is a huge required investment and upfront. When that the supply project actually started, these supplied LNG need to find the market. It is not easy to stop the supply of LNG, in other words. And 2019, 2020, we are seeing the continued growth of LNG supply project. And this supply project startup in 2019, 2020 was based on the previous FID, final investment decision, made in 3 years ago, 4 years ago. So even before the pandemic, many supply projects had a FID, and it happened that many projects started in 2019, 2020. And once supply project starts its operation, they need to find an outlet. So that's why, even though the global LNG natural gas demand is so weak, LNG demand, in other words, supplied, shows some growth in the year 2020. But because of the negative impact of the pandemic, there's no strong growth in LNG demand in the year 2020. And after 2020, the global LNG demand in 2021, 2020, 2022 will see the very strong demand growth again. Just as a case of natural gas demand, we can say that after overcoming the negative impact of pandemic in the year 2020, the global LNG demand is back on track. We can continue to see the relatively steady and strong growth for LNG. But because of the extreme event in the pandemic and extreme impact of the pandemic, the global natural gas price was seriously affected. Particularly, if you can look at the orange line in this chart, which reflects that the spot LNG price for Asia, spot LNG by definition, reflects that the supply demand of LNG in this region shows that a very strong decline up to the middle of the year 2020, last year, simply because of the very significant oversupplied situation. Oversupplied situation reduced LNG price in Asia very, very substantially. But you can see this reduced spot price bounce back in the middle of the year last year and shows that the rapid increase up to early this year. Why it happened? It is an extremely important question to be answered. For this purpose, I would like to show this slide, which shows that the gas price, crude oil price in Asia and in Europe after the January last year. And red line shows that the spot LNG price in Asia. As I said, LNG price in Asia continued to decline January, February, March, April, because of the impact of the COVID-19 and oversupply. And at some point, the spot price recorded $2 per million BTU, the historical low point. But you can see that the historical low point, the demand, LNG prices in Asia, red line, started to show that the slow recovery. Why this happens? There are two reasons. Firstly, the low prices incentivize the growth of LNG demand in Asia. In many emerging and developing Asian markets, when LNG price is too low, the affordability or competitiveness of LNG was enhanced so that these developing emerging markets can buy the lower priced LNG. And in the course of the last half of 2020s, there are several supply problems of LNG production chain, including some project in Australia and others reduced the supply. But as you can see that the price recovery towards the end of the last year became very strong and extremely strong early this year. Why this happened? There are several important events happened altogether. Firstly, the winter demand in China, winter demand in Korea, winter demand in Japan, Northeast Asia started to be accelerated because of the weather condition. And in particular, early January this year, there is an issue of power crisis in Japan. And you can see this extreme price spike was extraordinary in terms of the price level. And this led peak price is more than $200 per barrel in oil equivalent, while the Brent price, black line, continued to stay at $60 during this period. Spot LNG price in terms of oil price equivalent recorded $200 per million per barrel. So in other words, spot LNG price became extremely expensive during this period. So behind this extreme event, we need to highlight the importance of the power crisis in Japan in January. And today I would like to also draw your attention to the follow-up event in Texas, February this year. Both Japan and Texas experienced a very serious power crisis early this year. What is the background? Firstly, the extreme cold weather, bad weather, happened in Japan late last year and early this year. In Texas, in the middle of February, the historic cold snap attacked Texas, and there are lots of problems, social, economic, and political problems caused by this extreme weather. In terms of the energy sector, when the cold temperature happened, it naturally increased the power demand because of the heating purpose. While power demand increased, solar PV in Japan and wind power in Texas, both the wind and solar in both countries show that the rapid growth in the last several years did not function in bad weather. When the bad weather was very, very bad, solar PV didn't work. And wind turbine in Texas was frozen, actually. Under the circumstance, for both countries, Japan and Texas, actually that the gas-fired power generation is positioned as a main power sources. In Japan, almost 40% in normal time comes from the gas-fired power generation, and same in Texas. But there's a uniquely very important difficulties caused in the fuel supply chain. In other words, when LNG demand increased in Japan to meet that higher power demand, lower solar PV, we did not have a good opportunity to procure additional LNG supply. And that's why LNG spot price soared in Japan case, such as here. We tried to secure additional LNG volume, but Chinese demand, Korean demand altogether increased, and there is a supply problem, and altogether this was caused the extreme price spikes. And in case of Texas, the seriousness of power problem is just called the power crisis, and actually 27% of Texas customer had a blackout. And of course, under the circumstance, the extreme price spikes in wholesale power prices, both in Japan and Texas. As a word, we are seeing that the kind of common background factor, both in Japan and Texas, for these cases. What that means, the first, the extreme weather condition or natural disaster, the source of instability. And secondly, in both Japan and Texas, we continue to see the increasing contribution of renewable. In case of Japan, solar PV, Texas, wind turbine, did not function at this event. And both countries, Japan and Texas, gas, LNG fired power is very important, but supply chain problems caused that worsened the situation. In terms of Japan, we could not procure the additional LNG because of the higher price and because of the supply availability. In case of Texas, the bad weather caused the supply availability problem for natural gas. Actually, many natural gas facilities were damaged by the bad weather and extreme low temperature. And fourth, as a baseload power, coal in Texas, nuclear in Japan, faced with supply problem or supply constraint. Bad weather, RE didn't function, natural gas or LNG supply chain had a problem, and other baseload supply had some other constraint, both in country. And interestingly, Texas and Japan are characterized by the isolated power grid system. There's no very substantial international connection in case of Japan or domestic connection in case of Texas. So under the circumstance, we understand the supply resilience covering both for electricity and natural gas supply network need to be enhanced. This is a very, very important lesson learned from the recent extreme event in Japan and Texas. But the fact remains that when the bad weather gone, extreme low temperature gone, things became normal. Why? The market is still characterized by the abundant supply. This is IEPRe outlook for the 2021 LNG market, global LNG market. You can see that the supply capacity stood at 403 million tons, is far higher than the global demand of 380 million tons. So in a yearly basis, global LNG supply is much, much higher than the global LNG consumption. So under the abundant supply situation, when the extreme temperature, extreme weather condition goes, everything goes back to normal. But we need to be careful what is the implication of the pandemic on gas supply or LNG supply. Firstly, we saw that the extreme demand uncertainty caused by the pandemic. And furthermore important is the impact of the decarbonization for the future, makes final investment decision on gas or LNG investment more difficult. In other words, suppliers or investors in gas or LNG became very, very cautious about the future of gas or LNG market. They're asking question, is it good to make a big money investment now while we are seeing the uncertainty over the future of gas and LNG market? Under the circumstance, the truth is that if you have the deep pocket, if you have the big money, and if you are characterized at the lowest cost gas reserve, lowest cost supply option, those who are maybe able to make FIDs. If your money is rather limited and your gas resource or gas reserves are not least cost or not lowest cost, you should be more careful about the FIDs. So under the circumstance, future supply-demand balance of LNG or natural gas became more and more uncertain. But one thing may be clear, as I mentioned in the third bullet, only for with a deep pocket and lowest cost reserve make FID or supply side, which potentially implies in the future that the global LNG market in particular may see that a very strong market concentration with so-called big four, is a big pocket and lowest cost reserves or lowest cost supply option, namely Qatar in the Middle East, Russia, United States, and Australia. And the gas market player in this meeting room particularly probably know very well that the latest decision by Qatar to make a big investment to increase the additional supply of LNG. Many people are surprised why Qatar decided this at this point of time, but probably the answer relates to this slide. Qatar is clearly has a big deep pocket and characterized by the least cost LNG gas supply. Under the circumstance, market condition of LNG can be influenced by such very important major gas supplier like Qatar, Russia. And that's why we may need to pay attention what's going to happen in the United States and Australia. So I think that from now on, the supply side issue need to be very attract attention in the global gas market players. For this slide, I'd like to summarize that the more overall long-term implication of COVID-19 pandemic on energy sectors, including natural gas or LNG. Firstly, we may continue to see that the transportation demand may structurally restrain by the impact of the COVID-19, partly because of the lower demand for transportation created by the social economic transformation. And under this social economic transformation, digitalization is a keyword, and digitalization may substitute transportation demand. This, by definition, leads to the restrained oil demand while acceleration of electrification. And every country needs to address so-called 3E energy challenges: energy security, environmental protection, economic efficiency. But we need to ask the question, is there any possible shift in the priority of 3Es, particularly after the COVID-19 pandemic? So in this respect, we need to understand the importance of the wave of carbon neutrality. Many countries in the world, Europe, United States, Japan, Korea, China, are now announcing its intention to head for the carbon neutrality status in the long run. What that means, every country is now so keen to address the carbon neutrality or decarbonization. We don't know yet what will be the real outcome. Of course, we are heading to the more cleaner energy system, but whether or not we can really achieve the carbon neutrality as targeted years. And now we are asking questions about what the future of Asian energy trajectory in the future, whether or not we should head for the carbon neutrality just as other countries, United States, Europe, Japan, or not. But in any case, one unique point that I'd like to draw your attention is pandemic highlights the importance of the big government. Government intervention is necessary, or government intervention is the key to address such a global challenge like pandemic. And while the big government is expected to play a bigger role, we are seeing that the US-China new Cold War. And now United States is seriously looking at the Chinese behavior in terms of human rights and democracy, and tried to address this issue with allies in Europe and Japan, Australia, India. And under the circumstance, China is taking its own approach to make a strategic alliance with Russia and a new approach to the Middle East and Asian country. So under these circumstances, the global geopolitical tension is going to very, very high and very, very difficult. And that is a very, very simple answer why that the national security protection is going to be very important for every country in the world. So I think that this can be the overall long-term implication of COVID-19 pandemic. If there is no COVID-19 pandemic, this listed issue is not going. It may exist. Before and after, the world is changed so much, including many issues. But in terms of global politics, global economics, global climate change policy, and energy, and these are the important issues to consider very seriously. The last part of the long-term implication for the global energy market, in particular, or gas market, or LNG. Firstly, we need to understand that the world continues to need that affordable and stable energy supply to fuel our economy. This chart illustrates that the long global energy demand growth up to the year 2050, based on IEPRe Outlook 2021, released last October. IEPRe projects the global energy demand is likely to increase by 30% in the next 3 decades, centered by Asian developing countries' growth. Actually, more than 60% of global energy demand comes from China, India, ASEAN countries. As you can see from the right-hand side of the picture, the red bar shows that the incremental for the year between 2018 to 2050. Of course, Chinese energy demand growth can be seen in this chart, but you can easily understand the growth in India, growth in ASEAN, including Malaysia, is much, much higher than those in China. So this is an illustration based on our business as usual case or reference case. Everything goes as normal for the years to come. We are seeing that this kind of very steady, strong growth. And by type of energy for this business as usual future, we can continue to see that a very substantial contribution from the growth in fossil fuel, while coal consumption is projected to decline. But oil demand may not see the peak, but natural gas demand in particular sees a very strong, steady growth in the world. By region or by advanced economy and emerging and developing economy, natural gas is characterized by the fact even in the advanced economy, we will continue to see the growth in gas demand up to 2050, together with the growth in renewable. And in particular for emerging and developing economy, which is indicated in the right-hand side picture, natural gas demand increment is extremely large, largest in all energy options. So emerging and developing economy, in particular Asia, the natural gas demand is projected to continue to be very, very steady and strong. But there are several important factors we should take into account, or we should be careful about the impact to be considered. Firstly, that the global environmental challenge. But again, we need to differentiate the two important effects. First, the impact of the air pollution. Probably, this is more serious critical importance for many Asian developing or emerging countries. To combat air pollution in China, in India, and in many ASEAN countries and South Asian countries, the air pollution is critically important near an immediate crisis. And to combat with this, the use of natural gas can be a very viable option or viable solution to replace the use of coal. So under this scenario, natural gas demand growth may be accelerated. The point is that as far as air pollution combat is a priority for many Asian countries, this is a very, very likely scenario. We should be very careful about the recent and emerging issue of carbon neutrality. As I mentioned earlier, last year should be remembered as the year of the wave of carbon neutrality target. Everybody knows that the European Union, known as a frontrunner of climate change goal, climate change policy, continued to show its own very ambitious target of carbon neutrality in the year 2050. Of course, some of the European EU member countries, like Poland or other member countries located in eastern or central part of Europe, find the difficulty to meet carbon neutrality. But as a region, they finally agreed that the carbon neutrality target is year 2050. And to meet this carbon neutrality in 2050, European Union succeeded in making agreement to enhance its 2030 GHG reduction target to be enhanced from the current level of reduction target of 40% to 50%, 55% in the year 2030. And China became a very important part of the story when Xi Jinping announced its carbon neutral target in the year 2060 at the UN conference, September last year. China's aim is to reduce absolute level of CO2 emission earlier than the 2030 and carbon neutral status in the year 2060. To meet this policy target, they are working very hard to make the ongoing, the latest 5-year plan up to the year 2050 and the longer term plan to the year 2030. In Japan, the Prime Minister Suga announced our own carbon neutral target in 2050, October 2020, at the cabinet, it's a diet session. Frankly speaking, that the Prime Minister Suga's carbon neutral target announcement was a surprise in Japan. We understand that the carbon neutrality is extremely challenging, but Prime Minister Suga decided to go on this carbon neutrality target based on the understanding of the world effort to meet this ambitious target. And Japan's announcement was followed by Korea. And as you know, that the November presidential election turned out the victory of Mr. Biden. And Mr. Biden, during his election campaign, clearly announced his idea of carbon neutrality in the year 2050. And he indicated the very strong interest to meet this ambitious target, so that he recently invited the global leader to his own climate summit organized 22nd of April last week, further promotes the global decarbonization. So this is a kind of the wave of carbon neutrality, which is very significant. But as everybody in this meeting room can understand, carbon neutrality is a really challenging target. Simply based on the fact we are still heavily dependent on fossil fuel. I try to go back several slides back. Even EU, United States, and world depend on fossil fuel 80%, almost 19%. This is a fact. Meet the carbon neutrality target, the revolutionary change is required. We should strongly promote the energy efficiency and non-fossil energy use, like renewable and nuclear power. Plus, we should strongly promote the electrification with the achievement of zero-emission power sector. This is an essential prescription for the carbon neutrality achievement. I said that essential, but on top of this essential prescription, we need to expect the very strong contribution of innovative technology or innovative approach, such as CO2-free hydrogen. This is a must. And because of this expected contribution of innovative technology, transformation of energy sector to carbon neutrality requires a substantially high additional cost. We can call it a transition cost to carbon neutral. But to make our economy fly and to protect our citizens, the minimization of this transitional cost to carbon neutrality can be very important. And again, the carbon neutrality issues has a big implication for the future of natural gas and LNG. This illustration indicates the different possible pathway for global gas demand by scenario. We prepared IEJ reference scenario, IEJ advanced technology scenario, IEA steps, IEA delayed recovery scenario, and IEA sustainable development scenario. In our reference scenario and IEJ step scenario, which is a central scenario of IEJ long-term projection, it is expected or projected global gas demand continue to grow very steadily, strongly. But when the need to combat with climate change is increasingly higher, the global gas demand trajectory is affected very strongly. And in case of SDS, which comply with the meeting of UN Sustainable Development Goals, including the Paris Agreement, global natural gas demand need to decline. I said need to decline. Why need to decline? But IEA's this scenario is based on the backcast approach. In other words, to meet SDS goal of UN, gas demand in the world need to decline. It's not a forecast, it's a backcast. But again, if we really want to see that meeting Paris Agreement or even stronger carbon neutrality, it will become a reality that we can see that the decline in global gas demand, including LNG demand. Of course, every sector will be affected by scenario, and you can see in particular the power demand of gas. Gas demand for power sector will be affected most strongly in case of SDS. So what will be the choice of respective government, and what will be the real implementation of the policy in respective government will be the key factor to affect the course of the global and Asian gas demand and LNG demand. Put it simply, if we really pursue the pathway for carbon neutrality, probably it will be inevitable to see the decline in the gas demand. But as I said, there are lots of questions remains unsolved. Another important element to be considered for the future of gas demand or LNG demand, in particular in Asia, is the price affordability and price competitiveness. This illustration based on IEJ outlook in the year 2019. This is a specially made analysis for Asian LNG demand by price scenario. In the year 2050, the reference scenario, which is based on the price assumption of around $10 per million BTU, we will see the Asian LNG demand is projected at 436 million tons. But when we had the assumption of low prices of around $5 per million BTU, the Asian LNG demand is projected at 680 million tons, which is 60% higher than the case of reference scenario. So price matters, price competitiveness, price affordability matter, in particular in case of Asian LNG or gas market. So much depends on the price competitiveness and price affordability. put it simply, the sound development of gas market and LNG market depend heavily on the price issue. So under the circumstance, what can be the role of LNG or gas in Asian clean energy system? I personally, and IEJ as well, as a great believer that expanded LNG or gas share in Asian energy mix contribute to reduce air pollution in particular and CO2 emission because the effect of the coal switching. And abundant and affordable LNG gas will play an important role in Asian clean energy mix for the years to come, 2030, 2040, 2050. I think LNG, natural gas, can be an important part, important story to meet cleaner energy mix in Asia.
Prof, sorry for interrupt. Okay, just a reminder, we only have 5 minutes left, Prof.
Oh, sorry.
For this session, thank you.
Okay. But if Asian country aims at the decarbonization, or carbon neutral, just as the case of EU, that has a significant impact on LNG. We need to ask question whether many Asian countries, including Malaysia, need to pursue decarbonization or not. So under the circumstance, to what extent the function of Asia is very important, and to prepare for the long-term path of carbon neutrality, how that best utilize LNG, natural gas, including the use of innovative technology, is very important. So I'll go directly to the implication to Malaysia. Just as other countries like Japan, Malaysia face on energy trilemma. But under this energy trilemma situation, gas LNG need to play a very important role in your energy mix. That's why competitive, flexible, and affordable procurement will be the key to Malaysian energy policy. And while many things complicate the global market, Malaysia can best utilize the current situation, including the abundance of supply, to prepare and implement its own policy. And clearly, if you pursue the decarbonization pathway, it will complicate the future of gas. But it is quite likely that gas LNG continue to be an important source. But innovative options such as blue hydrogen and ammonia may become a key to Malaysia as well. Sorry, I made a mistake. I speak longer than I need. I stop here.
Thank you very much, Prof, for your insightful talk. Now is the time to address any of your queries. I think that we all have questions on our minds, but due to the time constraint, I think we can pick only two most important questions. Okay. So far we have received more than 20 questions, but I will ask two questions. Okay. The first question is, okay, hold on. Does the global oil and gas market predict renewable energy sources as the potential competitor with higher prediction of future energy demand? And with it, we have the SDG goal of sustainability. How may one realize this target if there is minimal significant impact of utilizing more towards renewable and instead continue to prioritize conventional fuel such as oil and gas? Prof Ken?
Okay, I need to answer this question number 4. Yes, simply that the renewable energy source is going to increasingly important for every country. This is true for Malaysia, this is true for Japan, this is true for United States, EU, every country. We are seeing that the growth of RE. To what extent that the RE can be increased, it depends on the country situation. Renewable energy like solar PV and wind power depends heavily on the firstly that the natural condition of respective country. If your country is very much endowed by the very good wind resources or good sunshine, it can easily increase the renewable energy source together with policy support. But if the weather condition or natural condition is not suitable relatively as compared to the most best endowed country, I think that the speed and the extent of that the renewable energy can be influenced and affected. So I think that in case of Japan, for example, that our condition in comparison to some of the European country or some in the Texas, we will see that the growth of renewable, but not so much as compared to the other countries. And also, more important point is the intermittency of renewable energy. If the share of intermittent or variable renewable energy increase, we need to have some mechanism or system to deal with this intermittency. We can do it technologically, but it increases the cost. So-called the integration cost of renewable can be the important issue to be resolved. And also we need to deal with the inertia force issues. So all in all, the integration cost of renewable can be the element to limit the share, optimal share of renewable. If you decided to decide at any cost, you can increase the cost of renewable. You can do, maybe you can do it, but from the economically optimal point of view, there are some optimal point of renewable depending on the country situation. Okay.
Thank you, Prof. Okay, now we move to the to our second and last question. The questions sound like this: what lesson can Malaysia learn from the power crisis in Texas?
Oh, this is a very good question. Yeah. And I think that the short answer is that every country, there's a possibility that we may face the power shortage or power crisis. While the acceleration of electrification indicates the security of power supply is the most important issues for every country. So you need to prepare possible such kind of event, and you need to identify what can be the weak point on your system and what can be the most possible negative point in Malaysian economy if such things happen. So with this understanding, you should prepare, you should establish some kind of strategy to combat with the possible negative impact on this power crisis. And essentially what happened in Japan after this crisis, the government of Japan started a very serious discussion on the issue of the power crisis and how we can mitigate the impact, or how we can avoid such possible difficulties. Stop here.
Okay, Prof. Can we have the last question, Prof?
Please.
I think maybe we move to the question number 1. So we move to the consumer part. Okay, the question sounds like this: will COVID-19 pandemic lead to changes in consumer behavior which could impact the gas demand?
For this question, I think that the consumer behavior has a bigger impact on oil demand in particular. That consumer behaviors has a big element for the social transformation, and so far the most serious impact is seen in the limitation of travel, limitation of the movement, limitation of the activities, citizens' activities, which all imply to the limitation for the oil demand. Of course, that the gas demand was affected by the reduced economic activity or reduced GDP or industry activities. But probably in terms of consumer behavior, the impact can be much less than in case of oil demand.
Okay, Prof. Thank you very much for your kind answer. Okay, and your very interesting talk. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we have come to the end of the event. It is my great pleasure and honor to thank all of you again for joining us today. As we are all aware, this live webinar is organized by IEPRe and was supported by Energy Commission of Malaysia and Tenaga Nasional Berhad. Before you leave the event, kindly submit the feedback form by clicking the link for the Q&A feature. We will be most grateful to receive your feedback, which will enable us to make further improvement in the future. We also will provide an electronic certificate for all attendees that have filled in the feedback form. Take care, stay safe, and have a good day. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Prof.
Thank you very much.